Monster Quest team will be in the Atlantic Ocean. They will attempt to attach a satellite tag to a great white to track its movements and hunting patterns. Sightings of the beast off the Atlantic coast have increased, and encounters with man are more likely. Biologist Dr. Greg Scommel has been tagging, tracking, and researching sharks near Massachusetts for 22 years.
All it took was one shark to bite one person, and it's game over for that species in terms of how it is perceived.
In 2004, Scommel was called in to deal with a 14-foot great white that swam into a shallow coastal pond on Noshawn Island, just a mile from Cape Cod.
The shark remained in that area for 12 days, and we tried everything we could to try to motivate that shark to leave. Certainly trying to take advantage of her sensory systems to get her attention to try to spook her out of there. And we couldn't move her. So on the 12th day, we actually had to physically force her out using very large nets. But it was kind of a wake-up call. It was an alarm clock that went off saying, hey, don't forget, there's white sharks in New England. And that's when we started preparing.
Scommel understands the fear that these ancient monsters produce.
It's a deep primal fear. Who wants to be bitten by something they can't see and ravaged or consumed? It's a horrible fear, and it clearly persists today.
The Monster Quest team will search the Atlantic waters looking for evidence that killer great whites are moving closer to populated beaches. Dr. Scommel has been trying to tag these sharks for decades, but there has never been a successful satellite tagging of a great white off the East Coast.
Not a single white shark in all that time period. It's my white whale, and I'm Ahab.
Sightings are on the rise, and Scommel sees an opportunity.
If we can indeed attract a white shark, get it close to the boat, we've got the gear to put a satellite tag in it. The way the tag works is you put it on the shark, and it collects depth information, temperature information, and light level data. And then at a time programmed by me, where I actually tell the tag when to do this, it comes off the shark, floats to the surface, and transmits all those data to a satellite. And then I can retrospectively recreate what that shark did during that time period. I'm very excited about this. If we get a satellite tag in a white shark, I'm gonna go nuts.
The tag data will allow them to track where the sharks go and may reveal their hunting patterns.
The largest white shark I've ever seen was about 19 feet long and 3,000 pounds, landed by a fisherman in Montauk, New York. That was in the early 80s, and that was at a time when you could go out and kill white sharks. It's a phenomenal animal to see. The length is one thing, the girth blows your mind. I'll jump on first, Johnny. Hey guys, how we doing?
Good, how you guys doing today?
We are fine.
Beautiful, you ready to rock?
Fine and fired up. You're gonna put us on some fish today, Cap?
We're gonna try like...
The boat will launch from Chatham Harbor and drop anchor near Monomoy Island.
I like what you're doing here, Captain, because number one, you got some depth,
Yep.
which is good. It comes right up to shallow water, so if a shark's in the area, it's going to patrol along here. And if they're keying in on these seals, we know this big seal colony that stretches all through here, and quite frankly, we've found carcasses of dead seals in these areas.
They head out and pick a spot to deploy their bait.
Gotta go.
The team chums the water with a mix of ground bluefish and mackerel in a prime hunting area.
And if you're a big fish, you want to be in deep water, but you want to be able to pin your prey against the shallows. That's a nice slick. That's a nice slick. You got a nice calm day, but the tide's moving it, which is great. You got to get it out there.
They also add a 5-gallon bucket of blood and a pig carcass.
We cover some area with this slick. We get it out a couple of miles, And the whole concept, of course, is you've got a shark cruising through here, if indeed there is one, and he crashes into the slick, and it senses the slick immediately and then works up the gradient of the slick, which leads it, of course, right to us.
And this is a prime area for the gray seals to haul out, and it's an area where we've found gray seal carcasses that have been hit by white sharks. You can see there's people in there walking on the beach. You know, it's a very popular spot for sunbathing, swimming, and also bird watching.
The team has their tagging gear prepared.
This is the harpoon that we use for tagging. Satellite tag will go on the end there with the dart, and once it's loaded and ready to go, Greg will tag whatever shark is at the boat.
So the way this works is we use this as the dart. All right, that goes on the end of the tagging pole. Shark gets close to the boat, jam it at the base of the dorsal fin. So basically what this will do is come down into the shark through the dorsal fin and lock in. And then this will just trail. Once it hits the water, it starts collecting data on depth, temperature, and light levels, and archives that every 10 seconds. It's basically a laptop strapped to the shark. Slip tip goes on like that. So this tag's ready to go, and if a white shark swam up right now, we'd deploy it.
They scan the water for movement.
We look for the telltale sign of a shark, which is, of course, the dorsal fin. Everybody pay attention. Keep your eyes out. Well, I got this wonderful image of a white shark just cruising along here.
Monster Quest is searching for huge great white sharks that may be coming closer to shore and targeting humans as prey. Mankind has feared these monsters of the deep since ancient times.
Sharks' interactions with humans can be traced back to Herodotus, an ancient historian of Greece, in the year 492 BC. And he described shipwrecked sailors being attacked and killed and eaten alive by monsters.
The oldest known shark fossils date back almost 5 million years. The latest research suggests that ancestors of these frightening beasts grew to over 30 feet in length. Those who made their living on the water, whalers and fishermen, lived in fear of the beasts for centuries. But it wasn't until 1916 that the world saw them as unstoppable killers.
From July 1st to July 12th, 1916, 5 people were savagely attacked by a shark off the New Jersey coast. There's speculation that a white shark was responsible for all 5 attacks, which caused the deaths of 4 people and the amputation of the survivors' left leg.
The attacks ended shortly after a great white was killed, with human remains in its belly. The panic that ensued during those 2 weeks would later inspire the movie Jaws.
White shark's population was decimated in the mid-70s after the release of Jaws.
Another fatal attack in 1936 would cement the monster's fearsome reputation.
Joseph Troy was a boy from Dorchester. He went down to Mattapoisett, and he was visiting his uncle. And Troy was out swimming in the afternoon with a Walter Stiles, and they were off of Hollywood Beach in Mattapoisett. And around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a shark appeared right next to Troy and grabbed him by his left leg, pulled him under. Stiles kept diving down trying to get Troy, but he couldn't. But Troy popped to the surface in a big pool of blood. When they got him ashore, they shipped him off, and he went to St. Luke's Hospital, and they ended up amputating his leg, and he passed away. Troy was 16 years old.
Today, the shark population is rebounding, and these beasts may be returning to coastlines and public beaches.
What I remember the most is that big eye.
Joe Fitzpack, a Massachusetts boat captain, was on a fishing excursion 2 miles out of Chatham Port when something almost attacked him.
We had two nice fish on, and as I was watching the one in the back being fought, somebody yelled out, the girl yelled out in the front, what was that? And I kind of looked, and all I could see was like a dorsal fin into the water.
Something grabbed the line and ran with it.
Then all of a sudden the line went limp, and when she reeled it in, all I had left was the head.
Then they realized something was under the boat.
As it went underneath the boat, it made a big circle around and came up, and it started bumping the boat.
The shark hit the boat repeatedly. Then, after a few hard impacts, the water went quiet.
As I was picking it up on the side of the boat, the shark came right up from underneath. That's when I noticed that it was a great white. I could see the big black eye. His lips were kind of pulled back, so you could see the shape of the teeth. From the head where he was and to the back of the boat was 14 feet. The shark came right up from underneath, grabbed the whole of the fish and just stripped the whole innards and stuff right out of it, and all I had left in my hand was the head of that fish. He was probably 18 inches away from my hand.
The close encounter still haunts Fitzpack today.
I'll never forget how close I was to, really the working end of a great white shark.
It's a needle in a haystack here.
The search off the coast of Cape Cod is proving difficult.
We got birds, we got calm weather, we got a great slick, and we got nothing as far as sharks are concerned. I don't think there are a lot of white sharks. If there were, I would have tagged a lot of them by now. I've got 22 years in the business trying to tag a white shark, and I haven't yet.
The light is fading.
My opinion is we move the operation north. Tomorrow's a new day. We're going to head up to Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary. It's a protected, beautiful, productive bank that rises up from several hundred feet to within 90 feet of the surface. We got, some reports in the last few days of large fish hanging out in the area, large sharks in particular. It's just the player didn't show.
Monster Quest is searching the United States coastal waters for killer great white sharks. New research suggests that these monsters stalk their prey, strategizing before striking, with the premeditation and precision of a human serial killer.
Sharks are actually learning where the best hunting spots are.
Shark researcher Dr. Neil Hammerschlag has spent the last 8 years studying the attack strategies of great whites in the waters around Seal Island, South Africa.
The sharks are picking their hunting spots, camouflage against the bottom through deep, dark, murky water, peering up to spot the silhouette of a seal against the water surface. This anchor point was not where the sharks had the highest chance of intercepting their seal prey, but instead was some sort of an optimal balance where sharks could detect prey, remain undetected by the seals, and even avoid competition with other sharks.
Hammerschlag calls these optimal stalking territories the underwater equivalent of dark alleys.
They're using some underwater alleys and using the underwater bottom topography to hide from or sneak up.
Using criminal profiling methods, Hammerschlag has tracked these beasts and identified the stalking areas around the island. Like human serial killers, the great white thrives in shadow.
We use a technique called geographic profiling, which uses the link sites of where attacks take place, usually criminal attacks on people, and plug it into this mathematical program called geographic profiling that uses the linked locations in this very fancy mathematical model, which determines where the highest probability of that criminal who perpetrates the attack is actually stationed themselves. Sharks and serial killers are obviously very different. They have a different motive, but basically they're using complex, similar underlying hunting strategies, which is the need to encounter their prey, avoid competitors, avoid being detected, and the need to use the underwater highways and other things, and that there's some linkages between their attacks.
Attacks that demonstrate the deadly efficiency of these killing machines.
The sharks are hunting primarily under low light conditions, like during dawn and dusk. And during times where it was overcast that day, they increased their hunting activity.
It is these shadowy conditions that give the great white its greatest success rate.
In comparison to lion, the king of the jungle has a success rate normally of about 12%, that's pretty good. But on average, the great white sharks at Seal Island have a success rate of almost 48%. And during low light conditions, they have success rates as high as 55%. That's over more than half of their attempts are successful. What we found has never been shown before is that when their success rate drops to about 40% at high light levels, they just stop hunting. So they actually know to stop hunting when the chances of them making a successful kill is low. Other animals would just keep hunting and, failing, but the sharks actually stop when their chances of actually making a successful kill is dropped.
The great white targets vulnerable victims, the weakest of which can be maneuvered and isolated for slaughter.
They'll let different seal groups pass by, older seals, and in a big group of seals of different ages, sometimes the younger ones can't swim as well and they start trailing off the back end of the group. The sharks notice it right away, they isolate that seal, and they launch their attack on that animal.
The great white favors the blitz technique used by human serial killers like Jack the Ripper. Attacks so quick and brutal that the victim has no time to react.
The sharks start tracking the seal's movement, monitoring the seal's breathing, and trying to anticipate when the seals lift their head out of the water to breathe, not looking down. At that point, the shark launches a brief vertical attack, and in just a few tail beats, rushes to the surface, totally knocking the seal in its jaws. They build up enough speed, over 35 miles an hour, that they hit the seal with such force at the surface that it incapacitates the seal, fatal on the first strike. It's over in seconds.
The science team is studying shark attack data to understand how and why these beasts are attacking man more often. The analysis seems to indicate 4 distinct types of attack.
Predatory attacks by white sharks are very violent, very high energy. Usually, the victims of predatory attacks do not survive. They are meant to immobilize and/or kill the prey on initial contact. This minimizes injury to the shark.
The predatory attack is the most likely to result in death to its victim.
Generally, it's a single bite, then the shark will back away and then come in at its leisure to finish off the prey.
These types of attacks are for feeding. An example of a predatory attack occurred in 1981 near Pebble Beach, California.
And it was a massive animal. A young man went surfing alone in Monterey Bay. The next day, 2 young men walking along the beach found a surfboard with a large bite removed from it. 2 days later, Lewis Boren's body washed ashore. He had been struck 1 time. The configuration of the wound, its location, immediately told us that it was predatory because the shark in a single bite had removed all of the tissue and organs that from under his armpit into the center of his chest, the sternum, and down and out over the top of the hip. So the shark had removed that entire section of Lewis Boren's body in a single bite.
Measuring the size of the bite revealed just how monstrous this great white was.
And it was over 20 feet.
The second type of great white behavior is far more frightening and grisly. They are called practice attacks and appear to be done simply to perfect the act of killing.
Whether or not these are attacks where the shark has decided after killing the animal it didn't want to feed, whether these attacks are the result of a reflexive response where the shark sees the seal and simply strikes it as a natural reaction, we don't know. What we do know is that decapitated seals, and a substantial number, washed ashore this year along the California coast, and that tells us that we had more activity from white sharks with these animals.
The third type of attack, known as an investigative bite and release, is by far the most common.
White sharks are a very curious apex predator. Anything at the surface is subject to their investigation. In the case of investigatory attacks by white sharks, those have been perpetrated against all types of ocean user groups: swimmers, divers, kayakers. That's when the shark isn't sure what the object is, and it circles and it will come in, and eventually it takes a very light nibble of the object. The shark isn't biting the kayak and the surfer because it thinks it's a marine mammal. It's biting that because it isn't sure what it is. This is their way of testing. Generally, when a human is involved, it will be one quick bite, the shark releases the victim and swims away.
The fourth type of shark attack is a defensive or territorial attack.
In the case of David Martin, it would appear that that attack was not predatory, that it was probably some form of threat, territorial displacement behavior by the shark. In the case of a territorial attack, the individual invades the shark's space. The space could be a specific location that the shark is using, possibly for feeding or pupping, and if you invade that area, the shark is going to try to drive you off. David was bitten multiple times, at least 4, possibly as many as 6 times by the shark. The shark returned and continued to bite him a number of times until the witnesses, the rescuers, you generally do not have that type of interaction between the subject and the shark when it's predatory.
Territorial attacks are just as devastating as predatory attacks, and any animal can be a victim. Off an Australian swimming beach in 2009, officials found a dead 10-foot great white, killed by this territorial type bite. Its attacker was estimated to be a great white over 20 feet in length. The cannibalistic attack was visual proof that these monsters will defend their territory against anyone or anything that gets too close. Storms are moving in along the coast of Cape Cod.
We got a report that some big sharks been reported east-southeast of the southwest corner of Stellwagen Banks.
Boston at Blue Hill Observatory, it was 63. Wind northeast at 12, gusting to 20 miles an hour.
The conditions will make sighting from the boat impossible. So a dive team is dispatched to see if they can get an underwater view.
Judging from the Coast Guard flag, it's blowing about 15 to 20 northeast, which is probably the worst wind we could have for where we're going. Definitely not ideal. Usually a day that we'd probably, stay at the dock. We're not that far from port now, and you can see the seas are definitely building the further out we get. The wind's probably picked up a good 5 knots, and there's patchy fog blowing around, so we're getting down to some low visibility. I mean, we'll find out fast if it's too rough or not.
The dive team tests the shark cage.
If it's bouncing up and smashing off the boat, there's no way we can put a diver in and risk that. If the diver got his hand or arm caught between the cage and the boat, he could break his arm, he could break his fingers. Okay, let's give it a shot, see what it looks like. Ready? See how the cage is shaking? To put a man in there, that'd be very dangerous.
The team has no choice but to turn back.
It's a little disappointing that we didn't get out there and get any sharks, but the weather just wasn't cooperating. The further we get out there, the more the wind picked up, the heavier the seas got, and it just was too dangerous to deploy the cage, and it would have been a really hard time spotting sharks in these weather conditions. So it's disappointing, but we know they're out there.
The Monster Quest expedition team is hunting great white sharks in the coastal waters of America and trying to determine why attacks on humans are on the rise.
There are more attacks now than there were 20 years ago along the Pacific coast of North America.
The team is investigating these recent attacks and sightings to analyze this new threat.
The potential for an encounter between a white shark and a human has increased along the Pacific coast in the last 10 years simply because the ocean user groups, their populations, swimmers, divers, surfers, and kayakers, have also increased. The more people we have in the water, the more likely you are to have an encounter if a shark is in the area.
There's another factor that may be playing a role in how close to shore these monsters are coming.
Pinnipeds, seals, have been protected since the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972. White shark's population was decimated in the mid-70s after the release of Jaws, so removal of these adult sharks in the mid-70s to sell their teeth in Jaws gave the pinniped population a chance to explode. Unchecked, there were no predators to keep them in check, to take care of the sick, the injured, the young and old. So their population grew and grew and grew, and now is at a point where it's growing exponentially. We have nearly 400,000 of them off our coast now. 10 years ago, we had barely 200,000.
And more seals mean more great white sharks.
You can expect to see them close inshore when you have pinnipeds along the shoreline. White sharks generally do not attempt to feed upon pinnipeds until they reach a length of about 10 feet, 3 meters.
With more great whites hunting for seals, there is a greater risk of a shark mistaking a human for a seal.
The growth rate of white sharks along the Pacific coast is dependent upon the available food. The more food the shark has to consume, the larger and faster it will grow.
There's another troubling consequence to this. With access to a steady food source, great whites can gain 100 pounds and grow a foot in length in as little as 9 months.
We have white sharks that have been reported this year that some people have said are in excess of 20 feet and as broad as a station wagon. Animals of that size probably are in the 19 to 20 foot range, and it's highly conceivable that their weight could exceed 5,000 pounds.
It is these giant great whites that have been spotted hunting along the coastlines, drawn in by prey they can sense even from miles away.
Sharks do have ears, located just back here on the head. They're very sensitive. They have hair cells inside of these ears, and they pick up on the vibrations that go through the water. Sharks use the auditory sense, or their sense of hearing, at distances very far away from their prey items, sometimes up to several miles away from their prey. Their prey items may make noises or even maybe splashing at the surface, and that's something that a shark will key in on and quickly go to investigate.
These monsters also have a highly developed sense of smell.
As a shark swims, it moves its head back and forth. The purpose of this is to find areas that have higher concentrations of odor molecules. And this is to help them pinpoint exactly where that prey item is.
As it approaches for the kill, the shark relies on bioelectric receptors.
Sharks have a big blind spot when they're feeding. When a shark gets to be about 30 to 50 centimeters away from its prey item, the shark is no longer going to be able to see directly in front of its nose. So a shark has a unique structure known as the ampullae of Lorenzini, which are a bunch of pores located on the head of the shark that are filled with gel. And what this allows a shark to do is key in on electric impulses given off by their prey. After it identifies its prey item, it's going to launch a vertical attack where it's going to swim directly upward.
Once the great white opens its jaws, it can no longer see its victim, but it still knows exactly where it is.
And it's going to forcefully ram into that prey item, damage it, and take a good chunk of meat out of it. Now, it's said that these great whites can take up to 50 pounds of meat out of their prey item in one bite.
But Craig O'Connell says this monster's preferred prey is not human.
They're no more dangerous than any other predator. They are a lot bigger than most predators, but we have to understand that the marine ecosystem is their environment, and we have to respect that. The great white shark over the past several decades has been represented as a man-eater, and this trait as being a man-eater is highly inaccurate. Great white sharks actually don't target humans as one of their prey items. We're not on their menu.
But something is bringing great whites to the waters where humans swim.
The big thing is about white sharks, we never go looking for them.
While in search of game fish, Wayne Davis made a bizarre sighting during a routine flight near Plymouth, Massachusetts.
The most recent one was right on the beach, just northeast of the Chatham Airport. It was a day after kind of a big storm. The water was all murky brown and green. Big surf. So I whipped around, got my camera out, went back out and found him. He was right where I left him. Just outside the surf line. 200 or 300 yards.
The massive predator was just off the beach with its victims in sight.
Just south of this beach, not a mile, and the white shark was headed south, was a gang of surfers. I wouldn't want to have been a surfer there. If I had been a surfer down there and I knew that shark was there, I would have gotten out of the water.
The Monster Quest team is in Massachusetts when two kayakers sight a great white near Chatham on Cape Cod. The kayakers were only yards away when a great white leapt into the air and grabbed a seal. It was the first of an unprecedented cluster of sightings.
I got a call from Captain Bill. He told me that he saw two white sharks off the beach, east beach of Cape Cod, area known as Monomoy Island. It's very exciting, but I'm tenuous at best because I'm wondering, you know, is it true? Are there white sharks out there? And if there are, we got to mobilize and get out there and do some tagging. We got to get this going. We got to get this happening. These things are going to leave. They're going to leave.
Scommel takes to the air.
He drove down to Falmouth, Mass on the Cape and got in his plane, flew out to the area, and literally within moments of arriving in that spot, you know, I saw a white shark.
The scout confirms there are multiple great whites off the Cape.
And after about 20 minutes, realized that this wasn't the only white shark. There were 4 of them there, in addition to this one. So 5 white sharks swimming close to the beach. Unbelievable. You know, 1, 2, okay, fine, that's exciting enough. But 5 in 20 minutes blows me away. It's like all of a sudden going out and seeing, you know, 5 Loch Ness monsters when you didn't even know there was one there.
The team launches into action.
Once I get back to my office, we're going to mobilize the crew. I want to get the gear together, get out on a boat tomorrow, and get Billy organized. He's going to have his team together. We're going to go try to tag these animals.
Monster Quest is investigating great white sharks along U.S. coastlines. Coastlines where these beasts seem to be attacking humans with increasing frequency. Man has feared these predators for centuries and the dangers that swim just offshore.
When we look at the history of shark interactions with humans along the Pacific coast of North America, we can find interactions with coastal Indian tribes and sharks all the way from the lower parts of California, extending all the way up into British Columbia. Legends and tales of sharks tipping over.
Dr. Skomel has been trying to tag these sharks for decades, but there has never been a successful satellite tagging of a great white off the East Coast.
Not a single white shark in all that time period. It's my white whale, and I'm Ahab.
Sightings are on the rise, and Skomel sees an opportunity.
If we can indeed attract a white shark, get it close to the boat, we've got the gear to put a satellite tag in it. The way the tag works is you put it on the shark, and it collects depth information, temperature information, and light level data. And then at a time programmed by me, where I actually tell the tag when to do this, it comes off the shark, floats to the surface, and transmits all those data to a satellite. And then I can retrospectively recreate what that shark did during that time period. I'm very excited about this. If we get a satellite tag in a white shark, I'm gonna go nuts. And we tried everything we could to try to motivate that shark to leave. Certainly trying to take advantage of her sensory systems to get her attention, to try to spook her out of there. And we couldn't move her. So on the 12th day, we actually had to physically force her out using very large nets. But it was kind of a wake-up call. It was an alarm clock that went off saying, hey, don't forget, there's white sharks in New England. And that's when we started preparing.
Skomel understands the fear that these ancient monsters produce.
It's a deep primal fear. Who wants to be bitten by something they can't see and ravaged or consumed? It's a horrible fear, and it clearly persists today.
The Monster Quest team will search the Atlantic waters looking for evidence that killer great whites are moving closer to populated beaches.
Because, number one, you got some depth,
Yep.
which is good. It comes right up to shallow water, so if a shark's in the area, it's going to patrol along here. And if they're keying in on these seals, we know this big seal colony that stretches all through here, and quite frankly, we found carcasses of dead seals in these areas.
They head out and pick a spot to deploy their bait.
Gotta go.
The team chums the water with a mix of ground bluefish and mackerel in a prime hunting area.
And if you're a big fish, you want to be in deep water, but you want to be able to pin your prey against the shallows. That's a nice slick. That's a nice slick. You got a nice calm day, but the tide's moving it, which is great.
The Monster Quest team will be in the Atlantic Ocean. They will attempt to attach a satellite tag to a great white to track its movements and hunting patterns. Sightings of the beast off the Atlantic coast have increased, and encounters with man are more likely. Biologist Dr. Greg Skomel has been tagging, tracking, and researching sharks near Massachusetts for 22 years.
All it took was one shark to bite one person, and it's game over for that species in terms of how it is perceived.
In 2004, Skomel was called in to deal with a 14-foot great white that swam into a shallow coastal pond on Noshawn Island, just a mile from Cape Cod.
The shark remained in that area for 12 days.
The tag data will allow them to track where the sharks go and may reveal their hunting patterns.
The largest white shark I've ever seen was about 19 feet long and 3,000 pounds, landed by a fisherman in Montauk, New York. That was in the early 80s, and that was at a time when you could go out and kill white sharks. It's a phenomenal animal to see. The length is one thing, but the girth blows your mind. I'll jump on first, Johnny. Hey guys. How we doing?
Good. How you guys doing today?
We are fine.
Beautiful. You ready to rock?
Fine and fired up. You gonna put us on some fish today, Cap?
We're gonna try. We're gonna try like.
The boat will launch from Chatham Harbor and drop anchor near Monomoy Island.
I like what you're doing here, Cap.